Hello there. This is just going to be a reiteration of federalism, with some more examples of it and a couple of review activities. It's super short. So federalism works in two directions. I don't actually think we've talked about this yet in class, but there's a vertical federalism in which the national government and state governments interact. So you can think vertical is up and down, right? So according to the Constitution, the federal government must treat states equally. They can't give preferential treatment. They cannot create new states out of existing ones or modify the border of a state without the consent of the state. They must guarantee a republican form of government for each state. They must protect, states from foreign invasion. They must protect against domestic violence or upheaval. They're obligated to provide military aid, to provide disaster aid, etc., etc. And then there's horizontal federalism. That's the federalism between states that includes interstate compacts, which are agreements that states make with each other, whether we're talking about business or building of or sharing of things like interstates or different trade deals. The full faith and credit clause, extradition clauses, and privileges and immunities clauses all play into how states interact with other states, and all of those clauses are in Article 4 of the Constitution, which deals with states and their rights. So types of federalism. We talked about dual. We talked about cooperative. Dual federalism is the delicious layer cake, and it's kind of the old school version. Cooperative is the marble cake, in which powers and policies are shared between the governments, and that's kind of been the deal since FDR up until roughly Nixon in the 70s. I'm going to throw two more terms at you, though. We've talked about new, and I said that that's like cupcakes, right? It's the idea that you're taking a cake, splitting up into smaller pieces, and giving them back individually to the states. So this started under Nixon. And the idea was that it would give states more say in how programs would be implemented. However, there is an argument that there's a different type of federalism going on just prior to Nixon in the 60s under President Johnson and the Great Society. Now, this isn't something that necessarily all political scientists agree on, but we'll talk about it. And that's centralized federalism. It's the idea that the national government will decide the needs of the country as a whole. So it really puts the emphasis on the federal government as opposed to states. It's similar to a unitary instead of federal type of government. I mean, the state governments still exist, but the 60s were a weird time for states. Like, the things that they were fighting over states' rights for were things that maybe they shouldn't have been, and the federal government was expanding its power as a result, right? And then the other type of federalism, arguably amongst some political scientists, is a type called conflicted, in which there's just conflict between the state and national governments over who should control what. So arguably, like the marijuana legalization issue, or marriage rights, or healthcare, would fit into this category of conflicted, not necessarily new. Even though some political scientists would argue that new federalism is still happening, and conflicted is a negative way to look at it, because it really emphasizes that while states have more say, they're coming into more conflict with the national government. So for cake analogies, I had to think really hard about this. Centralized, I think a good analogy would be Martha Washington's Great Cake, which I will upload a recipe to. It's this massive cake that has everything. It's got like 40 eggs in it and 4 pounds of sugar, and it's full of liquor. And it was served at both of George Washington's inauguration. But the idea is, it's got everything you need in it, and you can't like have anything left over for any other, state government or whatever if you've eaten one of those things. So I'm gonna go with centralized as like a Martha Washington's Great Cake. New, again, is the cupcake analogy with devolution. And then conflicted That's just like if there is cake but no one gets to eat it because everyone is fighting too much. It's like a sad birthday party. Anyway. So we've got two things that I would like for you to do with this lecture. First, which version of federalism do you think is the best? Dual, cooperative, centralized, new, or conflicted? Should we go back to whatever type of federalism you think is the best? Why are we not? And how do you think it would work in today's society? It's just picking one of these and answering these questions about it. Having said that, these are a lot of different types of federalism. The ones that you're most likely to see on your AP exam will be dual, cooperative, and new. But I wanted to pull out the other two because they are emerging political scientific theories that show some of the nuance within the types of federalism. The second thing is I would like for you to find an example from U.S. history of 3 of these types of federalism. So, for example, an example that I gave in the lecture just now for centralized federalism would be Johnson's Great Society. So that's all. You're just finding like something that a president or a state did that shows an example of conflicted federalism or new federalism or centralized or dual or cooperative. But 3 examples. They don't have to be long or detailed. It can literally just be like centralized federalism, Johnson's Great Society. And I think that's it. It is. Okay, so I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.